Chapter 21, Recognizing the Importance of the Education Environment. This neglected area is now recognized as being a substantial and very real element that influences students' learning. Tools are available to assess the education environment. What is the learning environment? We can read the curriculum documents, we can inspect the expected learning outcomes, and we can experience a wide range of teaching approaches, but we may know little about the student's experience in the education program. Key to this, suggests Jen, is the atmosphere or climate experienced by the student in the school. What is valued, what is recognized, and what is encouraged. He describes the education climate as the soul and heart of the medical school. It is the education environment that determines the student's behavior, their achievements, and their satisfaction. Becquerel and Roth likened it to the climate or environment in the meteorological context and suggested that we cannot hope to maximize the education output if we do not foster a nurturing climate. Contributing to the learning environment in a medical school or a postgraduate program and influencing the students' or trainees' learning positively or negatively are how students are taught and the education strategies adopted, what they are taught, how they are assessed, the types of clinical experiences offered, the books and resources available online or in the library, the values expressed by their teachers, physical factors such as lecture theater seating, heating, cooling, and levels of noise. The education climate is important. The establishment of an appropriate climate is almost certainly the most important single task for a medical teacher. It is the educational climate that ultimately determines a student's behavior, what and how they learn. Jan and others have highlighted that while the education climate may seem rather intangible, unreal, and insubstantial, its effects are pervasive, substantial, very real, and influential. The climate, it has been suggested, is like a mist. You cannot stay long in the mist before being thoroughly soaked. The climate includes the type of things that are rewarded, encouraged, and emphasized, and the style of life that is valued in the school or training program. A study of the learning environment can help to answer questions such as: is collaboration or competition between students encouraged? Is the student encouraged to ask questions and think creatively or to participate passively and follow the rules? Is the curriculum about meeting the needs of the learner or the needs of the teacher? Does the curriculum challenge and stretch students or require only minimum competence? Is the environment a trusting one where the teacher is supportive and tolerant of mistakes, or is the teacher viewed with suspicion as the enemy of the student? Without an examination of the education environment, these questions go unanswered. Jen suggests if we wish to describe, assess, or otherwise get a handle on the curriculum in a medical school, we need to consider the environment, educational and organizational, associated with the curriculum and the medical school. In postgraduate training, particular concerns have related to poor supervision, variable and unpredictable teaching, lack of continuity, the provision of feedback that is not constructive, and an emphasis on service requirements rather than educational requirements. These can all be related to the existing education environment. Suggestions that students become more cynical and less empathetic as they progress through the medical curriculum are a cause of concern. The problem may rest, at least in part, with the education environment. Too often, this is task orientated with the emphasis on the presentation by an expert scientist or clinician. They know the answers and procedures, while the social emotional orientation concerning the development of a caring helper of sick people is neglected. An appropriate education environment should encourage the development of abilities to empathize and identify with patients and their predicaments. The need for a fundamental review of medical education was proposed by the Global Independent Commission on Education of Health Professionals for the 21st Century, published in the Lancet in December 2010. The recommendations propose far-reaching changes to learning outcomes and to methods of teaching, learning, and assessment, and addressed issues relating to teamwork, interprofessional collaboration, international dimensions, and individualized learning. One could argue that key to the implementation of these changes is the development of a supportive education environment. Aspects of the education environment. The medical education environment is extraordinarily complex. The different dimensions are sometimes referred to as orientations. Some aspects or orientations of the environment that merit consideration are listed here. It is not a comprehensive list, but it provides examples of the various orientations. Collaborative or competitive orientation. It is a paradox that teamwork and collaboration are identified as important learning outcomes in medical training, and the interprofessional team is recognized. But the training program with which our students and trainees engage fosters competition rather than collaboration. Students are recognized and rewarded on the basis of their individual performance and not on their performance as a member of a team or group. For a collaborative education environment, students need to develop a feeling of belonging in the group or team. They should be encouraged to work with their colleagues and participate as part of a work team in clinical attachments. In a PBL curriculum and in team-based learning, the team process is valued. Student or teacher orientation. The education environment may be one in which the teacher is more valued than the student. In a student-centered environment, it is the learner who is valued. Their interests, impact on the curriculum, and independence and autonomy are encouraged as discussed in Chapter 15, Supportive or Punitive Orientation. Students or trainees in the past have been left to their own devices to deal with academic or personal problems. Some students have found the teaching threatening or intimidating, especially if they have been humiliated or harassed. This type of environment has been seen as helping to toughen up the student, with survival viewed as some sort of rite of passage. Learners were encouraged to cover up any difficulties experienced or refrain from divulging gaps in their knowledge. Fortunately, the climate has changed. Students are encouraged to assess their own progress and identify any difficulties they might have with the assurance that support and counseling are available. In a supportive education environment, learners are free to experiment, voice their concerns, identify their lack of knowledge, and stretch their limits. Community or hospital orientation. Medical education has been criticized as having as its base an ivory tower academic center, distant from the realities of the day-to-day practice of family medicine in the community. Professors and specialists with international recognition are the role models for the students. It is perhaps not surprising that in the past, a career in general practice or in a rural community was frowned on by students as being a second best choice. Fortunately, this tension has now been recognized and there is a greater emphasis, as described in Chapter 19, on students learning in the community and in the rural setting, with some medical schools established in a rural location. Research or teaching orientation. The teaching and learning program may be conducted in the context of an environment where research is valued and rewarded, and where teaching is seen as an activity that encroaches on writing research papers or proposals for funding. Some medical schools are trying to redress the balance by recognizing the scholarship of teaching as a criterion for appointments and promotions. Newly appointed faculty members may be expected to demonstrate or acquire through a staff development program expertise in teaching. Excellence in education in a medical school is now recognized by the Aspire to Excellence initiative. The effects of the environment. The educational climate may manifest itself in a number of ways. The education environment makes a unique and notable contribution to the prediction of student achievement and success. The motivation of the learner is influenced by the education environment in which he or she is studying. The education environment, along with other factors, can have a significant impact on career choice. Preference for a career as a surgeon in an academic center or for a career as a general practitioner in a rural community may be attributed to the training program's education environment. Staff may be more inclined to stay in a post if an institution has a good education environment. It is easier to attract new staff to such an institution. Assessment of the education environment. One reason why the education environment was ignored in the past was the lack of a suitable instrument or tool to measure it. A number of validated instruments are now available for use in different settings. McAleer and Roth described 30 such tools and provided a useful summary of them. Frequently used are the Dundee-Ready Education Environment Measure and the Postgraduate Hospital Education Environment Measure. The educational environment can be assessed using qualitative as well as quantitative approaches. A qualitative approach involves collecting data using a survey instrument with open-ended questions such as what do you most like about your training program, or by eliciting feedback from focus groups. With quantitative instruments, students are asked to reply to a series of questions, with each question relating to one aspect or dimension of the education environment. The REEM has 5 subscales as described in Appendix 8. Students' perceptions of learning, students' perceptions of teachers, students' academic self-perceptions, students' perceptions of atmosphere, students' social self-perceptions. The REEM contains 50 statements that cover these dimensions. A 5-point scale is used to score each item from 0 for strongly disagree to 4 for strongly agree. There is a maximum score of 200, indicating the ideal education environment as perceived by the student. Excellence is indicated by a score of 151,200. Instruments have been developed to assess the education environment in postgraduate education, in the anesthetic theater, and in the surgery theater. The use of environment measurements of the education environment can be used to establish the profile for an institution and gain a holistic view of the curriculum. Understand students' perceptions of the education environment they have experienced and compare it with their perception of the ideal environment. Compare the perceptions of the different stakeholders, including staff, students, and managers. Compare the environment as it exists in different departments or attachments within a school and at different phases of the training program. Provide the medical school or postgraduate body as a learning organization with an indication of what may be lacking in their program and where change may be necessary, while at the same time nurturing aspects where no change is required. Assess the effect of a change made in the curriculum, comparing the education environment before and after the change. Compare the environment of different medical schools or geographical settings.